Then eventually, just because it's nature and we have patterns in nature, we go from high agricultural yields in fertile years to maybe a decade of really bad environmental pressures and drought and not as much flooding. And so because of that, we start to have some agricultural problems. And again, with the weakness of the central government, it eventually breaks into these smaller regional kingdoms. All right, so that kind of is the end of the big power of the Egyptian rulers. Eventually at this point, they really don't recover. They kind of stay in their smaller regional kingdoms, and eventually the Greeks come in, the Romans come in and take them over. But before the Greeks and before the Romans, there are the Nubians. Nubia is a lesser known area in the south. If we look at the map here, you can see Egypt is here from the Mediterranean up until about halfway down the Nile River, and then we get into Nubia. Nubia is considered a more classical African kingdom. Egypt tends to have more genetically are more genetically tied to people in the Middle East. They're kind of lighter skinned. Where down here, this is modern day Sudan. And so Nubia is considered one of the first African kingdoms with black pharaohs. So it's a smaller kingdom. They have really good agriculture. It's just not as fertile as Egypt. They don't have as much fertile ground, as much flooding as Egypt. But they still have good agriculture. And so because of that, they can establish cities, just not as big of cities as Egypt may have. Because of their location, obviously they're going to have a relationship with Egypt. Egypt wants a relationship with Nubia. In fact, they want to take them over, and eventually they do, but never really permanently. Nubia is where all the good stuff is. Nubia's got the gold, man. Nubia has the ivory, the gemstones, the rubies, the emeralds. So Egypt wants all the good stuff. Also, because Nubia has all this stuff, though, they are able to become wealthy enough to have a strong enough military to fight off the Egyptians, because the Egyptians for centuries were trying to take them over. And eventually do, but not for very long. So they have a long history of relationships, and until 1600 BCE, they're able to remain independent from Egypt. Eventually, at the end of the New Kingdom, the Kingdom of Kush, which is the big Nubian kingdom, that is the heart of the Nubian people, is this Kush city, which becomes the Kush kingdom. Eventually, the Nubians are able to move north while Egypt is weak after the New Kingdom and take them over. And they're able to establish Nubian rule over Egypt for not quite 100-year period. But during that time, they in a very short period, reunite Egypt. All the kingdoms are brought together again for a very brief kind of last period. But eventually, the Nubians, the Kushite dynasty, which was the Nubian rule, they too end up falling to more invading Middle Eastern groups, specifically the Assyrians, who we heard about in Mesopotamia. The Assyrians start to develop the iron technology, and just no one in this region of northern Africa is able to compete with this. And this is why the Assyrians are able to create such a big empire, is because of this iron that they have. All right, the grapes of Africa during this period. First off, we talked about geography. You can go back to those slides if you want to. Religion, you guys know, is polytheistic. They believed in more than one god. The gods were based on nature, explaining what's going on in nature. The gods were anthropomorphic. Say that 3 times fast. This is a fancy way of saying that they basically saw the gods as half human, half animal, or half human, half nature. And they believe that these gods controlled every aspect of your life. They also believed in an afterlife, and we know this because of burial rituals, but we also know that they had very complex beliefs about how to get to the afterlife and live in the afterlife. And this was something called Mot, which is in the second bullet point here. Mot was basically the behavior control that they used on the people in Egypt. They very much told the people, and the people believed, that your behaviors in this life dictate whether or not you can get into the next life, which isn't very far off from most of the other religions in the world today. And it was believed that once you died, with Mot, you would meet her in the afterlife, and your heart would be weighed against a feather. And if it was heavier than the feather because of your bad behavior, you would not be allowed in the afterlife, and you would just kind of be sent into this abyss of chaos for all of eternity. So not really good. So religion was a way of controlling people's behavior very much in this ancient time. Here are some of the Egyptian gods. So you can see they're associated with nature. We have Ra, the sun god, the god of the dead. So there's really a god for everything, god of embalming. So everything was explained away by having a god tied to it. Here's the picture of Mot that I was telling you about. They had very elaborate afterlife beliefs written out in books, specifically the Book of the Dead. And this told you all the different stages that you were going to go through. And every dead mummy was buried with a version of the Book of the Dead to tell them what to do in order to get to their afterlife once they died. Arts, architecture, technology, we know some of this very clearly. They had the large-scale building projects, the pyramids and the temples. They had sculpture and painting, just like Mesopotamia, is primarily to transmit religion and government beliefs and rules and order, and also to show some of the awesome deeds of the awesome pharaohs just being awesome. They also had writing, we know this. Hieroglyphics is probably one of the best known writing systems of ancient times. It's pictographic. They used everyday things in nature, the owl, the lion, the snake, in order to explain things. And very few people could actually write or read, which is why being a scribe was such a high valued position within Egyptian society. Most people were just poor farmers. So this was really something that was used for the upper classes. The average person did not know how to read this, and we didn't know how to read it either until the Rosetta Stone. And that's where someone discovered this stone where there's Greek writing on it, as well as the Egyptian hieroglyphic writing that, and the Greek writing was translating it. And so when we discovered this Rosetta Stone in the mid-1800s, we were then able to actually understand the hieroglyphics. Also, they developed some scientific knowledge. We know that they had an elaborate number system. We know that they had mathematics, geometry, as well as an elaborate calendar that was relatively accurate. And they also started to have some medical expertise. They did some small scale like brain surgery and that sort of stuff, but also just some splints, bandages, basic knowledge of the body. But here's the thing about Egypt and their inventing. Whereas Mesopotamia really was kind of the mother of a lot of inventions, in Egypt they didn't really invent a lot of things. Instead, they diffused a lot of things. They took ideas from other cultures. Bronze was brought in, remember, by the Hyksos. Wheels, chariots, iron, they were all brought in by outsiders. So they were more adopters than inventors. Political structure, we talked about pretty extensively. Economic activity, primarily agriculture, but also, obviously, they were a trade center because of their location on the Mediterranean and the Nile. And they traded with areas in Greece, as well as Anatolia, Mesopotamia, in the Middle East, Nubia, and then also had routes going across the Sahara Desert into sub-Saharan territories. Society, it was pretty stratified. We had, obviously, the king at the very top. Below him, we had the nobles, as well as priests and his advisors. We had middle class, which would have been the more educated or skilled artisans, as well as the scribes.